we will get an introduction of the single-use plastics bill being discussed at the East Africa Legislative Assembly with the support of ALM by ALM themselves. Dr. Rosa can brief us about the process of the SUP bill. We also are honored to have representatives of the Legislative Assembly here, Honorable Machano and Honorable Gideon, who are part of this process as well. So Rosa, enlighten us and explain a bit what kind of gains East Africa tends to have by unifying its legislation on single-use plastics, because every single country has legislation. It's just a matter of a formal alignment.
Thank you very much, Henrik. He baptized me. Did you hear the baptism? Did you hear it? But those who we work with know that my one ambition is to do what? My PhD. I am working very hard. I'm actually looking for a professor who will allow me to do it, as I am managing partner at Tanjawala Nkana. So I accept that prophecy just in the way it came. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back. I spoke briefly yesterday and I promised to come back. You remember that? So like you heard, my name is Rosa. I'm managing partner here at ALN Kenya. I'm also a corporate lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance and employment law. And plastics has become one of our passions as a firm, and something that we are dedicated to seeing across the line in its various forms, whether we are talking about waste management, whether we are talking about the circular economy, whether you want to call it sustainability, whichever word you want to use, just in terms of getting all of us to a greener, healthier environment, whether that is physically, economically, but for all our benefit. So I have a simple task as we start this session. Would like to take you through what we are calling the East Africa Single-Use Plastics Bill, just to explain what is it about for those of you who haven't interacted with it, what is the ethos of it, what are our objectives, and where do we, what is our destination, or where do we want to go. After we take you through the SUP bill, then we will have a panel session, and I'm looking forward to that session. I have an exciting set of participants, of panelists for that session. So even as we talk about the bill, please think through the questions you'd like to talk about around waste management. So why are you here in a law firm? And we are not telling you about your litigation case, or we are not talking to you about the contract you want to enter into, or the land, the piece of land that you want to buy. The reason you're here is because as part of our work, we do a lot of pro bono work and CSR work. CSR is where we take our hands and feet, where we can go and help children in children's homes. We can help education, health, the elderly, the environment, where we don't need anything to do with our legal work. Pro bono work that we also do a lot of is where we use our legal minds without charging the manner in which we would charge any other normal or usual client. So many I think about 5 years ago now, Flip Floppy came to us through our connections and our networks, and we wanted to help them on a pro bono basis for the work they were doing. Why did we want to help them? We believed in their cause. At that time, they were working mainly around the Indian Ocean and collecting plastics, educating, building capacity, and doing what we call very now a buzzword, circular economy, which at that time I don't even think the phrase had been coined in that way. And so we started to work with Flip Floppy And when they came to us, they wanted legal help. They needed to do their legal work. But when we bought into their vision and what they were doing, we wondered what else can we do and how can we partner together. And that's what birthed our work into the plastic space. And we thought that the first thing we need to do, and did you remember the question yesterday about what is the main issue that is facing plastic pollution and eradication of plastic pollution? What was it? Awareness, isn't it? Awareness. So Anjala and Kana and ALN Kenya are based in, we are in 14 countries through ALN, and we have an office in Dubai. So we thought one of the issues is awareness and capacity building. And the second issue is around harmonization, because what is happening in Kenya is not happening in Uganda, is not happening in Tanzania. So we decided to do research work together with partners, Flip Floppy, ourselves, SIB. At that time, we had even had some conversations with UNCTAD, and we decided, why don't we do research to find out why is there a gap? What is the gap? How come there isn't uniformity of laws? And so we did the research in all the East Africa countries, and we found out, do they have a plastic law? What have they banned? What have they not banned? What are they doing around plastics? The second thing we wanted to find out is how is it being enforced? And then thirdly, wanted to find out how effective is that enforcement. And when we did the research, it validated our key question. This is how you know whether I'll get that PhD or not. It validated the question as to whether there's an issue with harmonization. And we got it because of things we'll show you in a bit. And so when we finished that, we were like, what is the second step? It is harmonization. What do lawyers do? They draft. So we took the initiative to draft a bill, which we called the East Africa Community Single-Use Plastics Bill. And since then, we have been going around talking to different stakeholders, whether they were regulators, legislators, the general public, and business leaders and people in the industry, just to get them to socialize around the bill. And then we gave that bill to the council, to the Committee on Environment at the East Africa Legislative Assembly, and that's why we're very excited. Between yesterday and today, we've had honorable members. I can see Honorable Gideon here, and we also have the East Africa Member of Parliament from Zanzibar and Tanzania here, who sits also on that in the Legislative Assembly. And they have given us the push that we needed to get the bill into the Parliament. So we are currently at the Council stage. It has been taken to the legislative drafters now that it was drafted by people who are not within EALA. So they took it to the legislative drafters there. And our next stage is to go to the Council of Ministers, because we want to introduce it as a bill in the East Africa Parliament, supported by the ministers. For those of you who maybe don't know the EALA process very well, you have private members' bill and you have government bills. Yeah. So we want it to go in as a government bill, for lack of a better word, because that means it gets faster traction. So that's the history of how we got here, where we are. And we are really excited to get more stakeholders on board to appreciate what is in the bill, why we are doing it, and how can we even make it better as we walk through this journey on legislation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite some lovely ladies to come and help us walk through the bill in a very short and simplified manner. As we, by the time we finish, I believe the PS will be here, and we can do his keynote, and then we'll go on to do our panel discussions. So I believe Eden, you're coming in first. So Eden, karibu.
Good afternoon. I'm Eden Gatwiku. an corporate associate in ALN Kenya, but also in the ESG workstream of the firm, and specifically also in the plastics workstream of the firm. I'll be taking you through a section of the bill. We've been talking about it a lot, but we thought it would be beneficial to know what exactly the bill is saying, and at least what are the salient features of the bill that we can each go and think around and see how to make better or how to engage further with different stakeholders. So I'll go right into the bill. Yeah. Okay, so just to give a bit of context on the bill and the why of the bill is that, the bill is premised on already existing systems and, mechanisms that the EAC has, and most especially the EAC Treaty, which is the treaty that establishes the East African Community to begin with. So it leans on a very strong and existing treaty because it actualizes the environmental commitments that the treaty, hopes that partner states are going to take seriously or are going to undertake in their different mechanisms. But as Rosa has noted, even as individual countries take different measures to eliminate plastics or unnecessary single-use plastics in their jurisdictions, the treaty is also alive to the fact that there is need for unified policies, not just in the matters environment, but in general. But specifically, we have 2 articles in the treaty that speak to a harmonized legislation to deal with waste materials or hazardous material. And in this case, the waste material would be single-use plastics. And through those articles, the partner states have agreed to create unified policies to preserve ecosystems and prevent degradation of the environment. So even as we speak to, having a bill in place, it's very important to remember that the treaty, which was formed years and years ago, had this vision of actualizing an environment in the EAC that is free from, let me say, harmful substances in each of the partner states. So even as we go into what the bill seeks to do or seeks to undertake, we remember the fact that the treaty that establishes the East African Community is alive to the need of environmental preservation. So further context on this, and we've been touching a bit about it on during this conference, is the fact that the EAC doesn't want to be left behind as the world moves towards a plastic-free environment as much as it can. So as ALN, we have been engaging, or we were involved in the INC3 negotiations that were in Nairobi. And so we thought, what a better way, even as the world moves towards eliminating plastics in one form or the other, to have a regional approach, noting the fact that there are very many different approaches that have been taken, all with their different levels of efficacy. But we are also alive to the fact that we hope to be moving as the world moves towards putting in place measures both nationally, but in this case regionally, towards actualizing the elimination of specifically single-use plastics from the EAC region. Next slide. So I'll go right into the salient features of the bill, and the bill is divided into 6 parts, but this slide is basically to tell you what are the main features that we are seeking to discuss in the bill. And I'll just go through them, but in further details even as we continue the presentation. And one is the key, and this is a part of the name of the bill, is that it is a prohibition of the manufacture, the import, the sale, and the piling and disposal. The reason we've taken a wide and, let me say, exhaustive approach is that even as we were comparing the different approaches by different partner states, the activities that had been banned were different. So some countries had banned the importation, some countries had banned, let me say, the manufacturing. So we took an exhaustive approach which allows partner states to take as wide measures as possible to eliminate single-use plastics from the EAC region. The bill also speaks to labeling provisions, which I'll speak to a bit later, but having labeling within the products that not only talk about the existence of plastics in the product, but as you'll see, the labeling provisions also speak to having information on the appropriate means of disposal for that specific plastic material. The bill also speaks to recycling and collection mechanisms and the broader waste management mechanisms that we'll talk a bit about later, and the permitted uses. So we're alive to the fact that the transition towards a single-use plastic-free environment will be gradual, and the transition will take into account sectors that very much need or are using plastics currently, and the phase out of plastics will have to be gradual. So as you will see, even as there are single-use plastics that are prohibited, there are those sectors that are whose uses of plastic will be permitted, subject to some caveats that are there in the bill. We also speak towards sustainable reduction of consumption, and also a great emphasis on awareness, on creating awareness and education towards what the bill is trying to do. So making sure as many people as possible are not only aware of this ban, but are also aware of why we need to phase out single-use plastics, or the harmful effects of single-use plastics in the environment, but also the fact that the world is looking into very viable, or at least very viable alternatives to plastic. So user awareness is a very big, we emphasize that a lot in the bill, because we think in this journey of moving away from single-use plastics, every consumer or every affected party will have to be informed about it. So as I said, the bill has 6 parts that we'll go over. We'll go over and talk a bit about, but we are also happy to share the bill for your own personal reading. So I'll go to the definitions. We'll not be able to cover all, but we've selected these definitions because they go right to the heart of the bill, let me say. And most importantly is the definition of problematic plastics. So the reason we have been very vocal about the fact that this bill is intended to prohibit the use of single-use plastics is because not only are they, let me say, the most problematic in the environment, but we also do not want to pass a message that we are coming in, full throttle and banning all plastics in the environment. We do believe that it's going to be a gradual process. So problematic plastics has been defined as those items or components where consumption could be avoided. And this could be avoided either through elimination, reuse, or replacement. And the second layer of this is that these are items that commonly do not enter the recycling or composting systems, or even when they do, they are detrimental to the recycling system due to their format or composition. So just to simplify that mouthful, it's basically items that, one, we usually do not, or it is easier, let me say, to find alternatives to these materials in the market. And secondly, even in the case that they are usually recycled, they do not they are detrimental to the recycling or composting systems. So we are really targeting those kinds of plastics where most consumers, let me say, they use and dispose kind of plastics. And secondly, that we hope that these are materials that we are able to easily find alternatives for. Secondly, again, is the fact that we are prohibiting, or we aim to prohibit, the single-use plastic products, which is a disposable plastic item that is made wholly or partly from plastic designed to be used once before it is discarded or recycled. But remember, as we've said, this recycling is usually either does not happen normally or is harmful to the recycling system in itself. So the next is the Council, which means the Council of Ministers of the East African Community, which is established by the treaty, and we are working very closely, or hope to work very closely with them in this journey towards actualizing the bill. And the last definition that I'll speak to is scientific purposes, which is one of the permitted uses or the exemptions of the bill. And as I said, we are alive to the fact that there are industries that will need a more gradual approach even as we seek to implement this bill or to effect this bill into law. And so such purposes will need to be refined, and we'll continue refining the specific industries that are exempted, with the hope that less and less industries will be exempted due to the availability of affordable alternatives. So the second part of the bill speaks to the regulation of single-use plastics and what exactly are we trying to target. So I'll cover some of these provisions, and my colleagues Fernan and Sharon will come and cover the last three, I believe. So I'll go straight into the first one, which is a prohibition of import, sale, and use, and what exactly that means for either stakeholders or other people who would be affected by the bill. So we'll go to the prohibition provisions. So Section 6 of the bill, as I've said, we've taken an exhaustive approach of prohibiting manufacture, sale, piling, export or sale of any SUP products that are listed. And if we go to the next slide, which we'll come back to in a bit. So Section 6, we've outlined the specific prohibited SUPs that are the bill seeks to tackle. And that's, as you'll see, even as we go through this list, these are very much use and dispose kind of materials. And these are very much materials where, you know, if we seek to, or if we put our minds to, we can find alternatives for, which is including polythene and plastic bags. Again, when we went through this research, we saw that many countries had, at the starting point of a plastic-free environment, was the banning of plastic bags or some sort of equivalent. So one of the things that we aim to do is, you know, that was one of the main single-use plastics that we aimed to prohibit, especially because as we undertook our research, many countries had banned plastic bags with different levels of implementation. And so if we put this as a regional level, I think we'll be able to better appreciate how these bans affect different countries, because some countries, even though I would say most or all countries have sought to ban plastic bags, there has been varying levels of implementation which have affected the general use of plastic bags within the region. Other of the prohibited SUPs are cutlery, that is forks, knives, and spoons, which is you typically get, you know, in takeaway food situations. Same to plates and straws, plates and bowls, and as well as plastic straws. The use of paper straws or metal straws has been quite common or is gaining some sort of traction in these countries, but we see that in most cases, these countries or consumers in these countries will still adopt the use of plastic straws. Same to cups for beverages, including their covers and lids, sanitary items such as dental floss and plastic bud sticks, and also let me say wrappers of sweets and other confectionery items. So as you'll see, it's a great starting point, because I believe these are products or single-use products that we can transition into a world where we use the alternatives and look for and invest in the innovation of materials that are rather invest in the innovation of the alternatives to these materials. So these are at the moment the materials that the bill seeks to tackle, with the exception of, you know, where permitted uses may apply to these products, which I'll discuss in the next slide. So as I've said, there are restrictions where the prohibition of these materials do not apply. And just to go over them, these are medical purposes, forensic purposes, scientific, industrial, printing house, construction. So as I was going through the definition, I mentioned rather that we would need to continue refining what these purposes are, and with the hope of making, you know, this list smaller and smaller, and perhaps maybe the first schedule prohibitions larger and larger, because even as we use materials in, let me say, medical purposes, forensic purposes, the more we, let me say, these purposes are retained as exempted, the less likely that we are going to this transition towards an SUP-free environment. So as we continue the journey towards putting this into law, we should also put in mind what are the alternatives that exist in these specific industries that we can perhaps invest in. So at the moment, the restrictions that I've talked about, or the materials I have talked about, will not apply to these specific sectors. But if you go to the bill also notes that even when you are participating in an exempted use or a permitted activity, you will need to communicate with the regulatory authority to the extent that the regulatory authority will deem the regulatory authority will look at the nature of your activities and whether truly it necessitates an exemption from, prohibition. So the aim in putting that into the bill is to make sure that we do not, that many people do not rely on scientific or exempted uses where there are other alternatives that can be used in that sectors. So we appreciate the needs to having these sectors being exempted, but we've also put in measures to make sure that many people are not riding, let me say, on these sectors or these purposes to not effect the prohibition of SUPs in their use. So so to summarize that, we have a list of items, of SUP items that are prohibited, and then also a list of permitted uses that this prohibition will not allow or will not apply to rather. So the last thing I'll speak to is the labeling provisions. As I mentioned, one of the provisions of the bill is that partner states should ensure that SUPs bear a clear, visible, and legible marking on its packaging and on the product itself. The one I shall draw attention to is the last one, because it's important that any labeling provisions or any labeling that you have in a product not only speak to what is in the product, but the resulting negative impact of inappropriate means of waste disposal on the environment. So we want the consumer to have as much information as to the why of this ban or the why of labeling items that are potentially detrimental to the environment or in one way or another, but also making sure that they have information on what are the appropriate waste management options, or what are waste disposal means that may not be appropriate for that product. So as we speak more towards having better or more efficient waste management mechanisms, we should also make sure that the consumer is aware of such waste management mechanisms. So that kind of summarizes part 1 and partially part 2 of the bill, and Fenan will come and continue on the rest part. Thank you.
Alrighty, good afternoon. My name is Fenan Estefanos. I'm an associate here at Anjarwala Nkana, and I also am part of the plastics team and the wider ESG work stream at the firm. So I will be taking you through the next 3 slides before my colleague Sharon comes to finalize on our presentation. So one aspect that we've seen as to be very important to circular economy and the prohibition on single-use plastics is not only just banning the importation, the manufacturing, the sale, but also having provisions for how these single-use plastics will be managed once they become waste. And so we note, and in our research, we've found that very many of the countries within East Africa have some sort of waste management laws. However, they aren't unified. And the point of this bill is that we want to have a harmonized approach so that there isn't any leakages between countries with respect to such waste. And so the draft bill takes into consideration how these single-use plastics will be managed throughout their life cycle. So it encourages a circular economy, how to prevent dumping of these wastes into water bodies, land, etc. And then we also have an inclusion of additional measures that party states can take in order to encourage the introduction of additional measures that would promote waste management. So these include incentives as to investment into waste management systems, promoting or rather incentivizing behavioral changes. So as Eden mentioned, we are very much big on legislating the need for creating awareness and education. And so one way we do that is also in this provision for waste management. As you can see, we highlighted some of the rationale behind this provision. Again, it's safeguarding our natural resources, supplementing already existing laws, and unifying those laws within the region. Right, so Eden talked about the permitted uses that the bill has for single-use plastics, or what we call the exemptions. Now, these exemptions are not a free-for-all. They're not an absolute application. To be able to be recognized as a permitted or exempted industry within the bill, you have to seek authorization from the respective regulatory authority. And the authorization, or an application for the authorization, would require the industry or individual or manufacturer to give reasons for the application, the quantities that they presume they will be manufacturing or producing, and the estimated period of which these plastics will be within the economy. And then lastly, an effective and appropriate waste management plan for how they will deal with these plastics once they have entered. And this will be supplemented again by our labeling provisions, as Eden had mentioned. Right, so we recognize that this can't happen all in one day, and so we, taking note of the just transition required for the circular economy, have transitional provisions in our bill, or in the EAC SUP bill. The transition will require that party states take some active steps, which include incentivizing the manufacturing of affordable plastic alternatives, educating impacted and affected communities in order to give them the information they need to be able to transition along with the bill, but also in order so that they are supported as they do this transition. Education as well, by creating labor and skill and job development opportunities within the SUP value chain, because again, we are promoting circular economy, so we recognize that there'll be very many opportunities within that chain. Again, we take note of our waste pickers who will need to be supported, and so we have provisions that include promoting labor welfare practices that will integrate informal waste workers into the circular economy. And last but not least is that we've introduced a way for extended producer responsibility to be supplemented in this transition. And the period we have is a 12-month period. This is midway between some of the countries that are already there. And so we recognize that that kind of covers all the countries that are within the EAC, and also provides sufficient period to be able to transition along with this bill. Rosa? Oh, Sharon is next, and she'll take us through the next few slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Rosa. My name is Sharon Moki. I'm an associate at Airline in the Projects and Infrastructure Department, particular focus in project finance. So I'll be taking you through part 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the bill. So part 3 is on consumption reduction of single-use plastics. Essentially, if you want to measure how well a legal provision is doing, you typically do a report, right? So based on that principle, we provided a provision that says the partner states to the East African community must report annual production and import of single-use and problematic plastics, and they must report measures taken to reduce consumption of single-use and problematic plastics, including their national consumption reduction targets, reusable alternatives, and market restrictions. Interesting enough, now this report would go to the East African Community Council of Ministers that's enshrined in Article 7 of the East Africa Treaty. The next part is part 4 on awareness, raising measures and incentives. Ideally, this has been talked on a lot, that for a consumer to change the way that they consume, you'd have to raise some form of awareness, right? And we are aware of this. So we provided a provision that states that partner states must raise awareness on the effects of plastic pollution on the environment and the availability of alternatives to plastics that are within the market, right? besides from that, we saw that the only way for efficient management of single-use plastics, there has to be some form of financing, right? So we provided a provision that states partner states should provide regulatory and economic incentives to activities aimed at controlling pollution that's caused by single-use plastics. Further, we went ahead and required that partner states are required to submit to the council a detailed outline of all the incentives that they intend to put in place to promote the eradication of single-use plastics. From there, we go on to part 5, which is the next slide. It's on sanctions and enforcement. So first thing is we acknowledge that the states in the EAC have autonomy. Now, based on that, the environmental authorities of these states are allowed to, one, develop joint assistance to effectively lead to coordination of this bill. But of most importance, this partner state and the environmental authorities are required to enforce the bill. Right? So we went ahead after that to provide penalties. Now, the penalties are divided into 3 categories. The first one is general penalties. These are penalties for anything that is stated as illegal within the act, but does not have, or rather within the bill, but does not have any penalties set out within that section. So there are penalties for individuals and for entities within the amounts that we've prescribed on the screen. So we're looking at 5,000 USD for individuals, or imprisonment of up to 6 months. But for entities, we're looking at 5% of the preceding year's annual turnover. Now, the next 2 categories are based on the type of offense, which is in the next slide. The penalties for manufacturing, selling, importing, and using single-use plastics, we've set them out, as you can see on the screen. For individuals is 40,000 USD or imprisonment up to 12 months. And for entities, we're looking at 10% of the preceding year's annual turnover. Now, the next category is penalties for piling or disposing of any single-use plastics in the public. And we've set out the fines as well. And this for individuals is 20,000 USD or imprisonment up to 12 years, or a combination of both. But for entities, it's 10% of the preceding year's annual turnover. It's worth noting that we have provided a provision on recidivism, which essentially is you're a repeat offender. And the penalty for the same is the penalty that is prescribed in the bill doubles, right? Because you are a repeat offender. Now, on part 5, we have provided for the compliance notice and certificate of compliance. So what this means is the relevant environmental authorities for each partner state can issue a compliance notice to an entity or to an individual stating that you have violated this particular section. We prohibit certain activities from ongoing and require you to take corrective actions, right? Now, the compliance notice will contain the reasons for the issuance, the required corrective action, the right to appeal, and the consequence of non-compliance. So all that information would be found in that compliance notice. Now, individuals or corporations could go ahead to the courts or tribunals of the relevant partner states and appeal the issuance of the compliance notice. Now, after complying with the compliance notice, the environmental authority for each partner state goes ahead and issues the completion certificate that says, yes, you've done the right thing now based on the compliance notice, and we give you a completion certificate. But if you don't comply with the compliance notice, there are penalties and fines that will be enshrined based on the partner states and what they prescribe under their laws, right? The final part, which is the next slide, is miscellaneous provisions, which is section 42 and 43, that essentially states that this act, or as it is now a bill, will take precedent over other laws in the partner state, and the Council of Ministers that is enshrined in the East African Community Treaty may make regulations to give effect to this bill, right? And the reasons as to why we provided for these provisions is we wanted some form of uniformity between all the states within East Africa. And this uniformity will allow us to have efficient waste management, in particular for single-use plastics. Now, with that, I come to the end of my section and move on to the Q&A, which Rosa can take over. Thank you very much.
I said to a group earlier this morning that I promise we have men in this organization, and very able men for that matter. It just happens by design that the plastics team has these beautiful ladies. Have they done a good job? Could we clap for them, please? So that is really the essence of the East Africa Single-Use Plastics Bill. I hope you feel more informed and that you understand what its provisions have. We will have an elaborate Q&A session after the panel discussion. So for now, please allow me to invite back Henrik so that we can go into our keynote address. Henrik, please.